Welcome to another episode of Presentation Hell. I am your host today, AlexAnndra Ontra, and with us today in Hell is Julia Munro. Julia is the CEO of Munro Enterprises, and she specializes in helping companies recruit business from the federal government. So she helps them put their RFPs together and their presentations together, and that's a very specific process. It's not your typical sales presentation process, but it can also be very lucrative if you make it to the other side of that. So Julie's going to talk to us a little bit about that today and some other stuff, if it sounds interesting or not. Anyway, so Julia, welcome. Thanks for being here.
It's so good to see you.
So tell us, first of all, how do you get into consulting for the government? Consulting for the Fed, because that's tell us about your journey that got you there, because it's such a specific thing.
Yeah, in my case it was very random. I started in commercial, and I was actually doing commercial IT in my late 20s, multi-billion-dollar IT opportunities in human capital management and managed services. And so I was leading big presentations myself. And then I got hired at a small company who, of course, wanted to double their revenues in the next 5 years, but they didn't want to make any changes to do that.
Okay.
After I got there.
There.
Yeah. So it was just a fluke. I got a call from a recruiter who said, how would you like to do this in the federal space? And I was very honest that I didn't have specific federal experience, but I had to do everything from soup to nuts. In the commercial space, it's really different because in those days, and I'm talking late 90s, in those days we didn't have the technology where a commercial entity would put all of their upcoming opportunities out on a website, so you knew what was coming and you could bid on it. You had to pound the pavement. You had to identify the opportunities. You had to cultivate the relationships wherever possible.
So you're a hunter.
Yeah, you had to hunt, and you had to gather. You had to do it all. And then also write the proposals, and then amass the team for the presentations and all that kind of stuff. So the core of it is the same. The difference in the federal space is that the government has these websites that say, in the next 2 years, we're going to be bidding out this contract. And there are just thousands and thousands of opportunities out there. The other thing is it's the government, so it's all very public. It's all very structured. There's a lot of legality to it, but it was crazy. I got a call from a headhunter basically, and they said, "How would you like to, go for an interview to do this?" And I figured, what the heck? And really, I looked at my husband at the time, and I said, it's like interview practice, right? They probably aren't going to want me. And they had a driver. I flew from Michigan to Metro DC, and they sent a driver for me. And the same driver.
Oh, that's nice of them.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Have a nice driver.
Yeah.
Well, now you just get an Uber.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, today you would take an Uber. This was a long time ago. So They sent a car for me, and the same driver took me back to the airport. And he said, how did it go? And I said, well, I interviewed with 3 people. And he said, 3 people? And he almost drove off the road. And he said, I drive for these people all the time. And you interview with 2 at the most. And half the time, the second person, something came up and they couldn't talk to you. And he said, 3 people. They said, you're going to have an offer on Monday. And sure enough, I had an offer the next week. And we were on an adventure. And I thought it was so amazing because I drove past the Pentagon, cool. From the airport to this interview and then back. And I remember thinking, I'd only ever seen it in movies, and it really does exist. And
it's pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah, it really was. I was I called my husband to tell him that I had arrived safely and I was headed over. And then I was like, oh my God, the Pentagon, it's right here. So yeah, I just kind of fell into it. And I think because I had the background of having to kind of do the whole shooting match from soup to nuts in the commercial space, I was really good at identifying the business development people and the SMEs, where they were not communicating.
And I could subject matter expert?
Yes, subject matter expert, yes.
That's one thing about working with the government or selling to the government. They're all acronyms. They all speak in initials all the time, and you have to follow along. It took me a long time just because I'm older and have a little more confidence. And at this age in my life, it's okay if I don't know something. So now I just always ask. I'm sorry, what does that stand for? ATO. What's the ATO? Authority to operate.
Right.
What's a SME? Subject matter expert. It's not just, I just ask now because they just
all
have their own
acronyms.
lingo.
And what's really bad is that over the 20 years that I've been doing this, they're starting to recirculate. So now it's not just, you'll say ATO. Is that this definition or this definition or this definition? Because
Right.
now 3 different agencies are using it and it means something different. So,
So just ask. Never be afraid to ask.
Never be afraid to ask.
Never be afraid to ask.
And it
So
doesn't matter what age you are.
Let's talk about selling to the government, presenting to the government, getting one of these like high value, high revenue RFPs and that process, because it is different than your regular B2B sale. So if you can so for our listeners who are trying to get in to sell to the government, which is not easy to do, because it's even though they list everything out and they make it very public, it's still like a huge forest of bureaucracy to get your foot in the door, to get recognized, to get attention, just to be able to make a pitch, much less get into the end stages of a big RFP.
So frequently what was happening for a long time is the presentation component, which they refer to as an oral presentation.
Oral presentation.
Oral presentation. Or orals for short. We just say, are there any orals? Yeah. Yeah, I know. In the commercial space, people think I'm being very sexual, and I'm not. Yeah. It's just the government. I can't make this stuff up.
So the government can do it, but regular people can't. Great.
Yeah, exactly. If you go to the Federal Acquisition Regulations, if you Google FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations, not to be confused with the FAR, the Federal Aviation Regulations. There's a great example
acronyms.
of the FAR.
It's all acronyms.
Yeah, so if you go to the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations, and you look up oral presentations, you can see all about it there. But for a long time, it was a part of a down select process. So the government will say, this opportunity is available to bid on, and you would have to write a proposal, present usually a management plan, a technical approach, past performance references or corporate experience of some sort to demonstrate that you have the chops to do that work. Mm-hmm. And then you would get evaluated, and depending on how you were evaluated, if you were evaluated positively, obviously, then you would be called back for an oral presentation. Mm-hmm. So how does that differ? A lot.
Let me interrupt for a minute, because there is a website where they publish all the things that are up for bid, right?
It's called sam.gov.
sam.gov, sam.gov. So if you're looking for business from the government, go to sam.gov, sam.gov, and you can see what's available if any of it meets your wheelhouse. Okay, keep going.
Yes, well, and SAM stands for System for Award Management, which used to be where you registered as an entity. So if you want to do business with the government, you need to have a federal tax ID number. I mean, you have to be an official business registered somewhere. And then you register with SAM. So SAM.gov is a lot of things. It's where you register your entity, and you get your registration with the government to be even able to do business. And within that registration process, you're going to do a lot of you're claiming that you are who you say you are and things like that. So you sign a lot of things.
Right. You have to prove yourself.
Yes, you have to prove yourself.
You do what
really
you do, and you are who you are. Right.
And you've never been debarred from doing work with the government and all that kind of stuff. So you're not owned by a foreign entity. So that's a whole process. And then once you're in, most things are there. I will tell you that there are certain things that the government does that are in the classified space that you might not see on sam.gov. They're in a special place. And so if you want to, let's say you want to do cybersecurity in the intel and defense space in a classified environment, because you really think you have something, you're going to have to start probably contacting those organizations and finding out what the contract vehicles are. And then
go to the Department of Defense directly go to the CIA directly?
You would go to their procurement office, like the head of their procurement office.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a small business, you could go to the Small Business Administration. They may be able to help lead you. Once you become registered as a federal contractor, if you apply to become a certain type of a small business, there's certain money in the federal budget that's set aside just for women-owned businesses, for service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses, hub zone, which is historically underutilized business zone, minority-owned. So they have all of these different classifications, and so if you apply for that kind of a status, you may have a liaison either locally or in the SBA, Small Business Administration, that could help guide you to those places, or help you get connected. But most of it is publicly available. There are also companies who all they do is essentially business development across the government, and they put it all into a database that's searchable, but the licenses to own that are very expensive. So if you want to do that, you probably want to be really
So you
serious.
would subscribe to a company that already does the legwork, scouring the government for the business opportunity.
Correct.
So you pay for that. It's like paying for a broker in a way.
Yes, and it's pricey. It's
Yeah,
really
I'm sure.
pricey. Yeah.
I'm sure. And so for a small business, that might be, out of scope.
Not
Might not be
justifiable
possible.
sometimes, yeah.
But going to your small business association is usually a good start.
Yeah, the SBA is a
SBAs
great...
tend to be more manageable.
Yes. And the other thing is the government now has evolved to where they want to know that you have established prices for the services that you perform. So let's say Shuffler wants to be able to do this for the government, because they do presentations within themselves.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so you would want to get on a contract vehicle. Now you're talking GSA, which is the General Services Administration. So there may be some good contract vehicles that would be appropriate for the work that you do, and you get established on that contract vehicle. And then when you meet the government, group or organization or person with whom you could provide Shuffler services to, you have an established contract with the government. That's what GSA kind of gives these government organizations a vehicle to buy through.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're already established. So it's that's a very high level explanation.
It's a high level. It's for very, very big contracts,
Mm-hmm.
Which certainly it's worth the legwork. One other thing, we have a couple of government agency clients for Shuffler. They're smaller contracts. They came to us. They found us on a Google search, and they start small, and then now we have them sponsoring us. We got our ATO, authority to operate. It's provisional, and then we have to do FSMA. I don't know what FSMA stands for,
Yes.
but all I know is it's more forms and questionnaires and references and all that stuff to get approved to the next level. So we have to do that in 2023. It's a whole schedule. And honestly, just to get the authority to operate, the questionnaire process was probably well over 1,000 questions, super detailed about every single aspect of your business. And that was for a small contract. I'm not retiring on the government contracts, not today.
Yeah, sometimes the level of effort for certifications and accreditation and things like that are a bit daunting for
takes a lot of time.
You could go after. It takes a lot of time, and some of it's redundant. It's not centralized. So, for example, if I have a top secret security clearance with the Department of Defense, that might not be accepted at GSA. They might put me through the process again, which is so stupid because all the fingerprints go to the same place. Another three-letter acronym, the FBI. So, I mean, it's just...
Big Brother's
really
watching.
Pardon?
I said Big Brother's watching.
Yeah, Big Brother. But but the thing that I think that more represents is a little bit of a disconnect that has evolved between industry and the government, where they don't realize, I think, sometimes what they're asking, and legal gets in the mix. And So I don't think, I think they're working on trying to make things a lot more efficient.
More streamlined, yeah.
Yeah, and not a cost burden on industry, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. Shout out to our sponsor, Shuffler. Shuffler makes presentations easier for everyone in your company. Every file is formatted as a slide, ready to present, so you have the right slide at the right time. Shuffler is presentation management. Go to Shuffler, 2Fs2Rs.com. Okay, we're back. So Julia, tell us, you work with your husband, yeah? You guys are business partners? Which is funny because my business partner is my brother,
Right.
James.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that dynamic.
Well,
How is that? Like,
yeah.
you bring it home with you? Can you separate? How does that work?
It's all blended for us, I think. I mean, we can compartmentalize and we can say, let's table that for later. We've got other things to do, but it's really, we met through work on a proposal that I was managing. It was a very large FEMA deal, and we had finished one of the major reviews. It's called a red team, and we had a management plan, and the reviewers just like blew it up and said it was terrible and we needed fixing. And the proposal center manager brought Andy, my husband, the next day to come fix this management plan. And, I told him what we needed, and I gave him a quick brief, and he said, okay, and he went off and he did it, and he brought it back the next day, and it was done. He came in the morning, and he said, it's all set, but before I, stand down, I just want you to take a look at it and make sure it's all right.
It's good to have a partner that gets stuff done.
Oh, dude, this was
actually does stuff and doesn't talk about doing stuff. Actually does it. That's a keeper.
Yeah.
That's
well,
so you married him.
Yeah. Well, the thing was that I thought he was a technical writer, but it turns out he's this brilliant solution strategist who happens to be really good at writing. But
oh wow,
it was probably a 25 or 30 page document, and he flipped it in a day. So we exchanged business cards, and then as my business was growing. And my clients started asking me, do you know great people? Like, he was my first phone call. So we had already worked together for a few years, and then had some life changes. We knew we worked together really well, and then we had some life changes, and then things became romantic. And then we actually merged our companies and then brought in another partner. His name's Doug. And it's really nice for us, and probably you have this with your brother too. Like, we have fairly clear swim lanes. It's not that we can't do a breadth of things, but like these are my areas and these are his areas.
Right.
So, and I have the utmost respect for him, for the work that he does. And so I might ask a question or two, but if he's got it, I know he's got it. And it's the same with me. Yeah,
James and I are very much... We stay in our own lanes. He does what he's good at. I do what I'm good at. We used to be better at compartmentalizing. When we were in New York, we had an office to go to, and then at home, when the day ended, we each went, our separate ways. And then holidays, families, we never ever talked about work when we were at family dinner or Christmas or anything like that, weekends. And now that we're in Tampa, our lives have kind of merged more. So it's a little harder to do that, but we're still, it's still about, I think, you're just focused on the end result.
Right.
You're focused on winning that next account. You're focused on growing your business. So you have to put your ego aside and just do the work that's going to get you to close the next deal.
Right.
And sometimes that's like, I think it's like, okay, I got to do the work to write this email to the client and get so task-oriented just to keep it going, because every step gets you closer and closer to your end goal.
Do you feel like you and your brother have good communication? Like, if there is a hiccup in a meeting or something, that you can go,
Yeah, but not during the meeting.
And have a chat. Pardon?
Afterwards, maybe, but not during the meeting.
Yeah, afterwards, of course.
We're one voice, but after we can talk about it privately, but never. Because that's just confusing for people.
Of course.
And then it throws them off. So we have to keep, again, everybody focused on the task at hand.
Absolutely. We can appreciate that because our work is always time sensitive.
Yeah.
So, you have like X number.
You don't have time to bitch and moan at each other.
No, you don't. There really isn't.
And then without a deadline, nothing would get done.
Yeah, and it's stressy, and you can get really exhausted. And so a lot of times it's just that, and you forget because it's like, oh, that wasn't even important. We were just tired. But yeah, so I love it. I mean, I love working with him, but I'm really crazy about him. So it's slightly different than with a brother,
I'm not crazy about him. I never will be.
Yeah.
No, kidding.
So it's been really nice. I mean, he's a brilliant solution strategist, so sometimes it's fun to just kind of watch him in action.
So do you guys pitch together when you're pitching clients?
Nope, that's my space. That's my.
So you're the presentation giver. You're the pitcher.
I am. That is predominantly me. I mean,
what's the best presentation you've ever given?
My best presentation?
Where you're like, I just knocked it out of the park, and why?
I had a $2 billion human capital management presentation that I was giving in front of about 20 stakeholders in California to a huge telecom, and the stakeholders were everything from staffing, managers, like CFO, to Asplund, which are like the guys that cut the trees down so that the tree branches don't mess with the telephone
wires
and all that kind of stuff. Oh yeah, I mean, it was everybody. So I had really taken a lot of time. I was really, really happy with my team. I was really happy with the technical people with whom I was working. I was a little bit.
How did you prepare for it?
Pardon?
How did you prepare for it?
When I understood what the driving forces were with the different stakeholders, I sat down with the team, everything from supply chain to staffing to technical, and said, these are the things we need to show them how we can make their lives better. And that was exactly what we did. And then I drove
you studied your audience.
Oh, yes. Well, but, and everybody really was coming from a very different place.
Right.
And miraculously, our solution really did help everyone, shockingly. So, and the other thing is too, I got really excited about it. I mean, if I'm excited about what I'm doing to help solve people's problems, I think that is very effusive, and it is contagious a little bit. But, my team got excited, and we all worked together really well. We rehearsed a lot. I will tell you that I would say is 100% the most important thing that you can do, that I think people try to skip or short. Rehearse. And like the level of preparation of, like, we went through the demo, we talked about all the points, we had, this possibility or that possibility, we were within our time, our allotted time, making sure to like lift each other up. And the more we rehearsed, the more we became really like one, we really were a team. And so when we actually got there, we just needed to know that everything was, like the projector was working and the laptop was connected, and you know what I mean? That was our biggest concern at that
point. Runs, that's what they're for, technical rehearsal.
Yes.
Tech rehearsal.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, that was amazing.
Do you have a worst presentation?
Pardon? My worst?
Do you have a worst presentation?
I have been very fortunate that I have not like totally embarrassed myself or hosed it myself, but I have had a couple of really bad experiences as a coach, as an oral coach.
Right.
I had one guy who was so arrogant that he could just turn the whole room off like that. And
that never happens. There's never that toxic person that just ruins it for everybody.
Ever.
And they know everything.
And it was a huge deal. That was like a $3 billion deal with a large department. And I was so concerned for my team. I actually went to the president of that business unit and I said, I really think we need to get a different person. But they were so excited because he looked really good on paper. He had all the calls. He had all the little letters after his name. He had all this cert and that cert, and he was so amazing. I said, at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter if he's just going to completely turn off your audience on a $3 billion opportunity.
Right.
And
So did you guys lose the opportunity?
no, the night before the presentation, we had rehearsed so much. This is important.
Right.
We had rehearsed so much. The people almost knew each other's slides to a degree. The night before the presentation, he fell down the stairs and broke his leg, which I would not wish on anyone. That wasn't okay. But he was too hopped up on painkillers and also he'd broken a leg, so he couldn't stand and talk. He did show up. If that tells you anything about how scared people are about following the rules of the government, like he had just broken his leg and he still showed up with a suit with the leg cut, so his cast would fit. But he just couldn't talk. He couldn't stand. He couldn't talk. The government, I think, was fairly sympathetic, and we actually won that one.
Good.
But he didn't present.
Right. But the other side of it is the government's the government, but there are still people who are human beings making those decisions. So they see the guy who said he was going to be at the meeting and showed up anyway, even though he had just broken his leg within 12 hours before. So there's, working with the government, you get caught up in all of this bureaucracy, but at the end of the day, they're still people, they're contractors, just like you and me, trying to do their job.
Yeah.
So
we have to remember that. We always have to remember there's still people too.
There are people, and so just to sum it up, know your audience, know that they are human beings on the other side. If you want to do business with the government, a good place to start is sam.gov, sam.gov, where you can go register, and that'll just start you down the process, and there are steps laid out on the website to follow. And rehearse, practice. I think we say that a lot on this podcast, but it's true, so be prepared.
It's very simple, and people skip it, and they don't realize that it doesn't matter how great your points are, how great your offering is, if you can't communicate it, if you can't engage your audience, and if you don't look like a team. Part of what happens with rehearsal is that people don't just get really comfortable with their speaking points. They start to really, get to know their teammates. A lot of times with these presentations, especially the kind of stuff that I do, these people have never worked together before.
Right.
You're not pulling people off of a contract who all know each other.
It's not a one-up meeting. It's a big agency pitch.
Yeah, they're meeting there. So they need time to get comfortable with their own speaking points and then start to listen to their colleagues talking. And then what starts to happen with more rehearsal is, it'll start to be like, oh, so when Alex does this quality control management portion of the management process, I'm a downstream thing, and this is how Alex and I work together, and then I make sure to provide after these meetings so Alex can do her continuous improvement. Now we look like a team, right?
Yeah,
because
know your audience and know your teammates.
Exactly.
There you go.
And then by the time they're rehearsing a lot and they actually kind of know each other's stuff and they're communicating across slides depending on who's up, they look like they've been working together forever, and they're having fun. Really what happens with presentations, and it's just as much in federal, to the point of these are people, it happens just as much as federal as it does in commercial. Really, it's a big group interview. And they want to know, do I want to see Alex's face every day?
Right. Who are the people you're going to be working with? People still
do
matter.
I think she'll get the job done? Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's about people. Julia Munro, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Alex.